So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me here to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, values and walking the talk. And for those of you who don't know what somatics is, it's really about the body and walking your talk. So I thought I would also start out with just a brief story as a way of kind of getting involved with this storytelling that's been going on. So it was 2005 in the fall, and I was fresh out of graduate school for the first time. And I had just landed a job at a dream company. And at that time, part of my role was to conduct 360 feedback interviews for executives at the organizations that had hired us to work with them and to help them improve their leadership. And that involved talking to people at companies that were big name companies like NASA, like Shell Oil, like the Naval Air Systems Command. And the problem was, for me at that time, I'd never worked in a business before. And I hadn't ever really talked to high-level leaders before, and I was super nervous about this task that I had to do. However, I had practiced and I was prepared, and so I got on the phone with one of the first leaders that I needed to talk to, and he was a VP at Shell. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do this, I'm ready, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to do what I prepared to do. I'm going to tell him about the 360 process, and I'm going to ask him some questions. We're on the phone. And so I started by asking him, well, have you ever been through a 360 before? Hoping he was going to say no, and I was going to enlighten him. And what happened was actually that he said, yes, I've been through a lot of 360 feedbacks, and frankly, I don't think they're very useful. We did about once a year, and I haven't really gotten any value from it. And my heart sunk, and I took a breath, and I said, okay. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this interview is going to fail, and by the way, this job is not going to go very well, and it's all downhill from here. But at that point, I remembered that I had a commitment to serve the client who had hired me to actually conduct these interviews, the client who had wanted to get feedback to improve his leadership. And so I was able to kind of recollect myself and ask the guy, well, all right, well, would you be willing to let me describe our process to you and then, take you through these interviews? And he said, sure, no problem. So by the end of my description, he was actually asking a lot more questions, really curious, kind of raving about how he thought our process could be different than what he'd been through before, and he really saw where there could be some value in this process. And by the end of our interview, he was actually asking me how he could get involved to get 360 feedback interviews to improve himself as a leader. So I tell this story for two reasons. One, it was a moment for me in my own leadership, in my own career, where I actually had an opportunity to go outside my comfort zone and really use the value that was important for me at that time to do something different and to actually engage in a new way. And the value, in fact, was being service-driven, which I know is a value that you all share. And at that time, I think if it hadn't been for having that value in the back of my mind as something that was important, I would have just frozen. I wouldn't have really been able to keep going forward. So I think that's the power of having a value and using it to move and to drive you towards action. The other reason I tell this story is because it was really one of the first moments where I started to get clear about the fact that many organizations share a similar challenge when it comes to walking the talk. What is it to walk the talk, right? It's actually putting those things into action. And I've come to find that almost every organization that I work with has some kind of a story about, well, we tried this in the past, and then nobody really did it. Or we did this leadership training, but we're not really, living it. Or it didn't stick for some reason. Or, we had this big launch, and then half a year later, we can't even remember what the values are. So, I'm here to say you're not alone, right? This is happening all over the place. And if you are curious about whether this is going to go somewhere, I think it's a valid question. Also, you're not alone in the sense that you are probably wanting something different than that. And I think that kind of starts here, which is I'm pretty sure why we're here. Let me see if I can get myself. So you're not alone. So actually, I just want to check with this room. And by the way, I think Tom and others have warned you, this is likely going to be interactive. So we start now. I want to check with this room, how many of you have ever tried to live a value, make a change in your way of being, lead in a different way, and failed and not really done it, at least in the beginning? Anybody in this room ever have that experience? So the ones who are not raising your hand, you've always succeeded at everything you've tried the first time. That's what I thought. Going left. All right. So anyways, what I'm going to invite us to do for the rest of the evening, however long we end up having together now, is to practice. Because my experience is that thinking about it and talking about it is great. It's a good place to start. But a little like the quote that Tom had put up by Gandhi, it starts with a thought, and then it leads to something, and then it leads to something, it leads to action, right? So I'm going to invite us to practice together here today as a way of kind of putting a stake in the ground and moving forward. So what I'd like to do to begin, well, first, actually, let me just ask you, are you willing to do that with me? Are you willing to practice with me tonight? I see. Oh, hey, I like that. Raise your hand if you're willing to practice tonight. Okay, and those who are not willing, we'll see what happens by the end of the night. So I have a confession. Again, I've been identified as a baton twirler, a dancer, a martial artist, a somatics person. I'm a body person. And the truth is that I bring a lot of that into the work I do with leaders because I really find that that makes a difference. That it's only really through our bodies, right, that we can actually take an action. Like everything else is kind of happening up here in our minds. So my confession is when it comes to talking about things like values, living values, and walking the talk, it's really, words are kind of not going to get us all the way there. So I tend to find that having a visceral, felt experience is a lot more useful than just talking about things. So to kick us off and actually have that experience, I'd like to start by asking you to stand up. Everyone would stand up. We're going to see what that is like. So I know that most of you in the back now can't see me. That's fine. You can listen and you can watch the people in front of you. So here's what we're going to do. Move your chairs aside so you have a little bit of space. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to have a felt experience with me. So here's what I want you to do. Take your hands like this, put them together, and rub your palms. And just feel for a second the energy in the palms of your hands. Feel the heat. See if you can generate a little bit of heat. And then point your fingers up. See how tall you can be. And then put your fingers down and feel the ground. It's going from we're sitting here, we're thinking about it, to we're doing something now. That's different. And I just want you to take a little walk. Literally just walk around the room, and just for a minute, just walk around and be yourself. Take a walk again, and this time walk as if you are a competent professional. Go ahead and walk, and this time walk as if you are compassionate. What did you get from that, from sharing that story, or from hearing other people's stories just now? So you heard their story and you had more respect for their experience, their point of view. Great. So in this exercise, in addition to what you chose, we're actually going to work with trust as well. Practicing trust. If you are the driver, your job is to instill a sense of trust. Thank you all for having me, and gosh, it's just been a joy, and I wish you absolutely the best and hope to see you again.